As you are all aware, our country has passed through a very, very major tragedy. We have lost the Chief of Defence Staff, the first Chief of Defence Staff of India, along with his wife, the lady wife, Madhulika Rawat. Both of them in one fell stroke have been lost to this country, to the armed forces, and to the newly created institution of this Chief of Defence Staff. There is a tragic vacuum which we are now encountering. Along with him went a whole lot of very capable officers, Brigadier Lidder, who was approved for the rank of Major General, decorated officer, promising officer, life cut short. What caused it, etc., we are awaiting that court of inquiry with bated breath, because this tragedy is too enormous to just be, taken in its stride. It's simply too huge a tragic accident, and the nation will have to come to terms with whether it was an accident, which prima facie it looks like, or there was something more, and that would have ominous consequences. For me, General Rawat was a personal friend. I have known him since the year of the Lord 1977 to 1980, when I was as a captain and instructor at the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun. He was then a gentleman cadet in that academy, the prime, finishing academy of the army, from where you pass out as lieutenants. In our days, it used to be 1-star second lieutenant, but that post no longer exists. General Rawat, I had the privilege to train him. I had the privilege to be his instructor, and he was showing signs of that future greatness even as a gentleman cadet at the Indian Military Academy, Dehradun. Dehradun, incidentally, the word comes from Dera Drone, the camp of Drona. What a coincidence that about 5,000 years ago, Guru Dronacharya had taken the Kauravas and the Pandavas and established a camp, military camp, on the banks of the Tons, exactly where the Indian Military Academy is situated. What a remarkable historical coincidence. That is where he trained. That is where Bipin Rawat got the Sword of Honour. He was the first in the order of merit in his passing out course. And that sort of marked him out for great things. There are people who start early in life, but then they fade out. There are a number of other Sword of Honours who possibly didn't go beyond the rank of, colonel, etc. But here was a consistent long-distance runner, consistent performer, long-distance runner, very energetic, very enthusiastic, and he was a combat soldier. Now, I think a soldier is a warrior, and what really cuts him out from the rest is the amount of combat experience he's had. Bipin Rawat had it in terrific measure, one rank after another. He saw combat in different theatres, different environments. He served in Jammu and Kashmir as a colonel, then he served as a sector commander of the Rashtriya Rifle, then as divisional commander at Uri, one of the critical infiltration points. He had the experience under his belt. Then he served as a corps commander in the northeast. He had a helicopter crash, but he survived. You see, Napoleon, whenever he was promoting generals, of course he would go through his dossier and all that, but then he would ask one question. Is he a lucky general? Bipin Rawat was. Unfortunately, till our luck ran out in this very, very tragic incident, tragic air crash, helicopter crash. Like I said, Bipin Rawat was a combat soldier, a soldier's soldier, and the medals on his chest testified to his vast and combat experience, unmatched combat experience. He had the Param Vishisht Seva medal. More than that, he had the Uttam Yudh Seva medal. You see, then he had the Ati Vishisht Seva medal. Then he had the Yudh Seva medal. He had the Sena medal. He had the Vishisht Seva medal. You know, a chest full of ribbons along with a wound medal, which we call, in our army, the Purple Heart. And that is, I think, the proudest medal you can wear. That you faced it all on the battlefield. You've taken it on your chest. You've experienced the fog of war. You've experienced the difficulty of decision making in a life-threatening environment. And I'm afraid that is what you need. I mean, it is a dire need for the higher ranks, for the higher command echelons of the army, especially the Chief of Staff. He served tenures in the Military Operations Directorate, in the Military Secretaries Directorate. These are the top plum posts of the army. And he was never in the so-called, cushy post like ADC or, military secretary, additional military secretary. I mean, these sometimes people derisively call them chocolate cream soldiers. He was a soldier's soldier. Soldier with tons of combat experience under his belt. He had done the Ranger course in the United States, which is toughest, physically cuts him out to be one of the fittest. Apart from our commando course, he had done the Rangers course in the United States. And he was an officer cut out for big things. And I keep saying that one qualification for the Chief of the Army Staff should be how much combat experience has he got. Because without combat experience, your military profile is somehow not complete, and it really qualifies you for the top post. And he held the top post with aplomb. When he came back as the Vice Chief here, I met him, we met at a function, and he greeted me so joyously and with such respect. That was the hallmark of an officer and a gentleman. He was now so much senior to me. I had retired as a 2-star general. He was already a 3-star general then. He rose up to be 4-star. But he was so gracious to his old instructor, his old platoon commander of the IMA days. He always sought me out. He often invited me to his home, to his office for one-on-one meetings where he would use me as a sounding board, discuss things, take views, take inputs, take different opinions. At times we did differ strongly, but he had the breadth of vision, the grace to accept different viewpoints, give it a very patient, very good listener, and which is a hallmark of the higher ranks. You should be able to listen, otherwise we get so busy communicating our plans and proposals that we forget to listen patiently. The hallmark was that patient listener. He was a Khandani soldier, second generation officer. His father had been a lieutenant general in the Indian Army, also from the infantry. And he had that grace to give respect to an old ustad, to an old instructor, when you really didn't have to. Most people forget, but he did not. That was what cut that man out as such a gracious and such a gentleman, officer and a gentleman. The lady herself, what an embodiment of compassion, grace, and how she went out of the way to interact with the other ladies. She had so down to earth, no airs about her, and it is so refreshing to see such a lady who is so down to earth despite the high ranks her husband has achieved. She herself was the president of the Army Wives Welfare Association and rendered yeoman service, and it was so cruel of destiny to snatch them both together. My heart goes out to those poor girls, to those daughters who took it with such stoicism. The whole nation saw them take it on the chin. and the girls lit the pyre of their father and their mother together. What can be a greater tragedy than that? The loss for me is not just a national loss, not just a loss to the armed forces, it is a deeply personal loss. Bipin Rawat went beyond the army chief, the 4-star rank. He was India's first chief of defence staff. As you are aware, the Kargil Review Committee had, strongly recommended that India must have an integrated defence staff and we must have a chief of defence staff for jointness. There must be one single point of advice for the political leadership. Because, you see, even in the Kargil war, we had strong differences of opinion, between the army and the air force about how exactly air power should be applied. And there was nobody to, because what is the military qualification available to the Prime Minister's office or the Defence Minister's office? Military experiential qualifications. Of course, they have the civilian qualifications, the breadth of vision, the political insight and savvy. But when it comes to resolving a military dispute, then you require somebody with hands-on military combat experience. The only time we saw it functioning very well was when Sam Manekshaw had a long stint as the chairman chiefs of staff, chairman chiefs of joint staff here, and he virtually acted as the CDS. After the war, he was elevated to the rank of Field Marshal and he was to become the CDS when the Air Force objected very strongly because there had been differences between Air Marshal Lal and the Field Marshal, on the exact modus operandi of using air power. So when Bipin Rawat was appointed the first Chief of Defence Staff after he finished his tenure as the army chief, it was a rare occasion and it was a cause for celebration, at least for the very great imperative of jointness. Please don't forget that jointness, integration of the three services has been a very contentious issue in all armed forces of the world. In the United States, there was constant bickering, turf wars, turf battles between the US Army, US Navy, US Air Force, US Marines. There they have 4 services. And ultimately, it was by an enactment of the American Senate, the Goldwater-Nicholas, Act, which rammed jointness down the throats of the 4 services there. Because they were constantly squabbling. They just could not agree to come to a common kind of a platform. They are strong turf battle because military personalities tend to be strong personalities. And when you have reached the pinnacle of your career, you are not likely to, again look for orders from somewhere else. You would like to do your thing. So it had to be enforced by a Senate legislation. But the advantage in the United States is that the civilian sector there has huge amount of military experience. Many of them have served in the armed forces, unlike here in India where very few armed forces officers really make it to politics. But they had that experience there and they have a civilian bureaucracy which is very militarily savvy. Unfortunately, in India, we have not developed such a specialist civilian bureaucracy. They are birds of a passing feather. He is in the animal husbandry and tomorrow he may be the defense secretary and defense secretary defense production. He may come from the housing and construction, etc. I mean, it's a very generalized bureaucracy which really hasn't, apart from a few individual cases, developed that military judgment, experience, expertise, capability in geostrategic studies, etc. That has been unfortunately a bit of a lacuna. So it was given to General Rawat to enforce this jointness. The political masters took the decision and they asked him to implement it. So he designed the job of the CDS himself, virtually designed the job of the CDS. You see, going down till the ranks and accoutrements and what kind of a cap badge and what kind of a shoulder badges of rank he designed them himself along with his team. And he created this dream job kind of a thing. And he had considerable experience of handling the bureaucracy, handling the politicians. He had been in the military operations directorate, he had been vice chief, he had been the chief. So he had tons of experience in this, how to work the system. You see, unfortunately, many of our very senior generals, they have never had the opportunity possibly to serve at the army headquarters and the apex headquarters, deal with the ministry, defense ministry, finance ministry, other ministries, home ministry, etc. So they lack that experiential profile. They are good field commanders, excellent field commanders, and they make excellent chiefs also. But they lack that experience of how to manage the system, the bureaucratic, labyrinthine bureaucratic system, the political quagmires. He had that all. And therefore, he asked for the powers of a secretary to the government of India, the financial powers. He got it. He got it. You see, he created a military wing in the Ministry of Defence. He truly integrated the civilian Ministry of Defence with the armed forces. Now there are armed forces officers serving as joint secretaries in the Ministry of Defence. Previously, the Ministry of Defence was so anti keeping out the armed forces that even if an armed forces officer was posted there, he would not be allowed to wear his uniform. He had to operate in civvies. That was the level of, they're trying to create that separate watertight compartments, those silos. Fortunately, he broke down these silos and he wrought a paradigm shift in that tortuous process of military acquisition. In India, that has been a bugaboo since the time we became independent. I mean, it has been terrible. The whole process is mired in bureaucratic delays of decades. By the time a system that has been asked for comes in, it is already obsolete. That is the level of the problem, you see. And then there is the angle of corruption. Every deal mired in corruption, bigger deals, and the politicians trying to skim the money off, bureaucratic red tape, everything. He cut that Gordian knot. He created a paradigm shift, if I may put it, in the process of military acquisition. And the way he speeded it up. Let me just give you a concrete example. 10 years of UPA rule, we got not one single jet fighter. When the Air Force strength was declining at an alarming rate, we needed 45 squadrons, we were down to 28. I mean, this can be a disastrous situation. Had, God forbid, had a war taken place, we would have paid a heavy price. And who would have been responsible? It was almost like a crime against the country. Who would have taken that responsibility? Air power is the deciding factor in modern post-war conflicts. Even from the Second World War onwards, it has been a decisive factor. Whosoever has air superiority finally prevails. So, weakening your air power. When you brought the airframe, when you brought the fighter jets, the Su-30, the MiG-29, you did not buy the beyond visual range missiles. Even in the Balakot strike, when the Pakistani retaliated, we had the example of Wing Commander Abhinandan with his outdated 1960s era MiG-21 going and taking on a F-16 fighter of American origin. And the American fighter had the Aram missiles of 80 kilometers range. The missiles on the MiG-21 had 30 kilometers range. Who's to cater for this? The romantic dogfight era is over. It is despite that sheer courage, man over machine, that man went and shot down an F-16, a far superior machine. With a second generation MiG-21, he shoots down a 3.5 generation, fourth generation almost F-16. But he had to pay a price. Who failed to buy the beyond visual range missiles? Somebody will have to answer. I met the former air chief and he was almost virtually in tears. You see, and he said that we had begged the government to get us this missile and it was said, no, there is a cash crunch, so you will have to do without it. You have to do without it means somebody pays with his life. And thank God it was just one, he survived that air crash. And India had to threaten full-scale war to get him back. So these are the requirements of the services which were just not being met. We didn't get one single aircraft for 30 years, for the 10 years of the UPA rule. But when Bipin became the chief of defense staff, and the Chinese started the problem in Ladakh, it is Bipin Rawat who within a matter of months got us 3 squadrons. 1 squadron of Su-30s to take care of all that we had lost in accidents, 2 squadrons of MiG-29s, interceptors. The Rafale was just coming in, trickling in. It hadn't come in when the standoff in Ladakh started. He got the Navy's MiG-29s, those that have been brought for the aircraft carriers, out to Ladakh. He could do that because he was the CDS. He was innovative. He knew the capabilities of all 3 services. And then he got the Boeing maritime reconnaissance aircraft, which have a deep capability to look inside enemy territory. So he got the maritime reconnaissance aircraft from the Navy, deployed them in Ladakh. Got the drones, got everything last minute in that panic buying, which should not have happened if the process had worked normally. That we had to do panic buying just highlighted the need for a CDS. He worked the system very well. He got it in emergency purchase for that. He got us the S-400. And the S-400 is a game changer. It is anti-access area denial weapon, not just a surface-to-air missile system. It has got a detection range of 600 kilometers, and I'll be talking more on it separately, and engagement range of 400 kilometers. That means the whole of Pakistan is covered. Sitting in India, any plane that takes off from any bloody airfield in Pakistan will be shot down from the Indian side. We can gain air superiority without using our fighter aircraft, destroy the Pakistani Air Force, and they'll have to think 10 times once this system is fully in place. It started coming in. And Pakistan will have to now watch out before they even press the accelerator for asymmetric war. Because I think we should give it back to them now. And now we have the wherewithal to do so. So he created that paradigm shift. Even earlier he had, implemented the so-called Dovell Doctrine, that 30 years we have taken it on the chin in asymmetric warfare. We have just confined our actions to consequence management on our own side of the border. It is Bipin Rawat who first struck across the border in Myanmar to implement that Dovell Doctrine, that we will do surgical strikes across. Pakistan said, oh, we are not Myanmar. After Uri, the Indian Special Forces showed Pakistan what they could do. They went in 3 kilometers inside, got to a launch pad and killed 40 to 50 terrorists even as they were sleeping while waiting to cross into India. For 3-4 months, Pakistan was quiet. They were quite surprised, shocked in fact by this hot pursuit operation. And then of course they did the Pulwama. They regained their bit of their Dutch courage. They did Pulwama, and India retaliated across the international border into Pashtunkhwa proper, Pakistan proper, 80 kilometers inside Pakistan. They destroyed the Balakot terrorist training camp, sent it up in smoke. And for 22 months after that, Pakistan was quiet. When we did away with 370, when we did away with 35A, Pakistan could only make pro forma noises. They were now dead scared of an Indian retaliation that could escalate into full-scale war with terrible consequences for Pakistan. It is then that China realized that it has lost a great leverage of Pakistan against India. Pakistan was keeping India busy with asymmetric war, with no energies left to really take on China. So China was very worried, and then it staged the Ladakh incident at the height of COVID, when COVID originated in its territory. And it's a Chinese gift to the world. And if that country had really been shocked by this pandemic, would they have taken on all their antagonists, all their adversaries at the same time in South China Sea against Taiwan, in East China Sea against India? Look at that burst of aggression in 2020. And this is where Bipin Rawat once again showed his mettle. his combat experience, his combat judgment. He matched the Chinese man for man, tank for tank, gun for gun, aircraft for aircraft, and he put them in his place. The Karwan incident, we may have lost 20 men. The Chinese have lost over 100. They were shaken up with this fierce comeback from the Indian side. And then India did a quid pro quo to their salami slicing tactics, to their nibbling tactics by occupying the Kailash range, which overlooked the Moldo garrison, and the Chinese were shocked out of their skin. And that is why they decided to talk, and look at the hurry in which they withdrew from the north bank, because they were terrified of what India had done in the south bank. So we got the better of the Chinese. And kudos to Bipin Rawat. Today Kashmir is, when I was serving there were 5,000 armed terrorists in J&K. Today there are just about 150. There are national flags in the Lal Chowk, national flags in the Dal Lake margins, every office in J&K. The credit goes to Bipin Rawat, the Indian Armed Forces, the Indian Army, Security Forces, paramilitary, police. Now comes one of the more contentious issues, right? One of the more contentious issues, and that was that Bipin Rawat, one of his charters was to integrate the armed forces virtually physically integrate them. There were 17 single service commands, and as a cost cutting measure, as a measure of integration, Bipin Rawat was all set to reduce them just to 4 tri-service commands. 17 to 4 tri-service commands. People were nervous, people were shaken up. Such a sweeping across the board reform, I wouldn't call it a reform, I would call it a paradigm shift. At a time of such great danger, when the Chinese and the Pakistanis were breathing down our throats, the Taliban had taken over in Afghanistan, Turkey was trying to pretend to be a Khalifa with a caliphate, planning to send 3,000 Syrian terrorists into J&K, trying to help Pakistan in every possible way, wanting to take over the Bagram air base and station its F-16s there to help Pakistan in an India-Pakistan war. We have not seen a more dangerous national security environment. And this is just the external threat envelope. What about the Maoists within? What about the Maoists within? What about the jihadis? So it was such a threatening environment. And the Cassandras of doom, the naysayers, the doubters, and some of them very rightly, they were concerned. They felt that the pace of change should not be so rapid. We should make haste slowly. We should not create organizational turbulence of such a massive order at a time when we are under threat of attack. And possibly we should do this, but we should do this slowly. Frankly, even my personal advice to him had been this. But Bipin Rawat had the courage of his conviction. He was a man in a hurry. He wanted to do it before he debated office. And it would have been a paradigm shift across the board. He was a blunt, straightforward, outspoken man. And he didn't mince his words in giving his opinions, and whether people liked it or they did not like it, especially the politician, if they didn't like it, it was just too bad. He was like Sam Manekshaw, outspoken, blunt, straightforward. This is what a chief should be, whether a chief of the army, chief of defense staff. The rank and file expects him to be speak like that. Straightforward, frank, truthful, honest. So whatever he believed in, he had the courage of conviction to say that. He had the courage of conviction to push that line in the face of opposition. He could be very blunt. He could be very, very brusque with his opponents who tried to delay or come in the way of his reforms. And he was, like I said, a man in a hurry. And some critics have tried to make much out of this. But he had the courage of his convictions. It takes great amount of guts, not just physical guts, but it takes great amount of guts to, in the face of such trenchant opposition from the other services, sister services, from your own colleagues, from the bureaucrats, when you try to push through such across the board reforms. So in losing General Bipin Rawat, the nation has had a very tragic loss of a very talented, very experienced officer, and there are even people saying that he would have made a very fine president one day. And why not? Why not? We hope that the government will suitably recognize his services, and despite the very controversial decisions that he had to take sometimes in the larger interest of the services as he felt it, he became quite unpopular. There were very uncharitable comments against him, but he wouldn't give a damn. He told me once, "Sir, I'm not here to win an election. I've got a job to do." You are damn right. He had a very serious job to do. I would like to pay my personal tribute to General Bipin Rawat, our former army chief, our first chief of the defense staff, who's done human service for the country, for the cause of the integration of the services, for creating tri-service commands for the Air Defense Command, the Maritime Command. He has pushed them through, and in the times to come we will see other reforms also. Keeping the overall environment, I would still say that we must do it, but we must make haste slowly in terms of generating organizational turbulence at a critical time. Thank you. Jai Bharat, Jai Hind.